Right, so we're going holding by the Book of Leviticus Chapter 18. Again, we're going holding by the Book of Leviticus Chapter 18. We're in verse 5. And we spoke last week, finished up Torah Chaim Kadosh. Right, we spoke about spoke the difference between Adam and Ha-Adam, right? The man or man in general, why non-Jew not necessarily called Adam, right? It's not called human, or a secular Jew not called human, right? So we spoke about that the last few weeks. The Torah says, again, chapter 18, verse 5, Book of Leviticus, Shmartem es Vukosai, es Mishpatai, Sheyase Oisam, Adam v'chai behem ani Hashem. So right here, the Torah says, you shall therefore keep my ordinances, things, mitzvahs that don't make sense, and my judgments, mitzvahs that do make sense, which if a man do, I mean, it's a little strange language here, right? It says, it says, Asher Yaseh Oiso, that a man will do, he shall live in them, he shall live in them, not die by them. Right? As we mentioned, I am the eternal. Right? So now we're going to see the Rabbeinu B'chai. Now comes along the Rabbeinu B'chai, one of the great earlier commentaries. And the Rabbeinu B'chai says, he's commenting on what it says at the end of the verse, right? That he says that, what does the Torah say? The Torah says, Asher Yaseh Oisam, Adam, that a person does them, right? That you shall live by them. Now, the first thing he says is, what are we going back on? We're going back on Mishpatim. Mishpatim are laws that I understand, that make rational sense. So he says, again, when it says v'chai behem, you shall live by them, means you shouldn't die by them. Right? We're going to see. It's talking about the big three, that if you have to give up your life for any time, any place. We'll see in a second. But first of all, he says, it's going on laws we do understand. We're not talking about the laws we don't understand. Right? So he says, those are the laws that a person lives in those places. Right? Now, what does that mean? It means very simple. The laws that govern the land. Very simple. Laws that you're obligated to keep, right, by the law of the land. Now, a person can say, well, the law of the land may be corrupt. Might be. Right? It might be. Now, if there's a contradiction between the law of the land, right, and let's say Torah, you got to uphold Torah. Right? You don't listen to the law of the land. Right? We know there are many Jews in Russia, former Soviet Union, right, that would risk their lives to do circumcision for their sons. They would risk their lives to teach their kids Torah. Now, in a place like that, obviously better not to live in a place like that if, you have no way to get out, right, or whatever, so you're stuck. Okay. Right? But you have to teach kids Torah. It's against the law. You got the KGB, looking out for people, see if they're going to, have all these spies all over the place, or here in Israel, we call them the KGB, right? Regardless, people do great self-sacrifice to keep the law, right? To keep what the law says, right? Now, one of the things we pray every day, the Shemona Esrei, silent meditation, whatever you want to call it, we pray that we should return to Jerusalem. Right? Now, what does it mean to return to Jerusalem? It means we should have judgment like before. In our own lands, our own courts, i.e., Beis Din, Jewish law courts. We should go back to that. Now, it doesn't mean you can't have, Jewish law courts, in other places, not just in Israel. You have Jewish law courts all over, right? It's an obligation. As the Mishnah Sanhedrin says, obligation to have Jewish law courts everywhere, right? Every city, right? Sometimes the problem is you have two Jews, we'll just mention this for a second. You have two Jews come to court, or let's say better, you have a Jew who takes another Jew to court for whatever reason, right? Comes to Beis Din, the other Jew doesn't show up. Right? Now, let's say he's not going to show up. Secular Jew, he's not going to show up. But you have to bring him to court. You have to bring him to Jewish court. Now, if he doesn't show up the first time, they'll give him a second summons. If he doesn't show up at the second summons, then the third summons, the Beis Din will send a messenger to deliver to where the person lives. Make sure they get the summons. And they'll be warned, right? They'll be warned about coming. Now, by the third time, if they don't come, let's say they don't have any good excuse why they're not going to come, then the rabbinical court will hear, the Beis Din will hear claim of the person who's got the claim against the other person, right? The Reuven's got a claim against Shimon. Now, if the Beis Din sees he's got a good claim, very good. So then they'll tell him, okay, since this other person's not coming, we give you permission to go to secular court. Now, the only permission to go to secular court, if there are two Jews, is if the other side doesn't show up. Even if the other side's not going to show up, doesn't matter. A Jew's not allowed to go to secular court, right? Unless the other side doesn't show up after 3 times. Yeah, the other side doesn't show up, that's it. Right? Nothing to do. So you have to go to secular court. Now, there's an issue, and that is some people may say, well, we know the person's not going to go to secular court, so therefore I'm going to go straight to secular court. Sorry, they're not going to go to Beis Din. So therefore I'm going to go straight to secular court. It's a major, major Torah prohibition. Person has to get permission from the Beis Din in order to go to secular court. Now, let's say someone built on someone else's land. You see their building, right? You go to Beis Din. Another person doesn't come. They could directly send you to secular court to get an injunction so the person can stop building. Yeah, that'll go much quicker. It depends what the case is. Right, that a person be allowed to go straight to secular court, right? But you need permission from the Beis Din in order to go to secular court. You can't just go to secular court, right? A major, major Torah prohibition. Now, what's the problem? What's the obvious issue? Let's say you have a contradiction between secular law and Jewish law, but you can't. But this person will not come to Beis Din. Yeah, so what? Right? You have no choice. Right? We always say that if you have to go to secular court, the other person won't go to Beis Din. Okay, so you go to secular court. Now, secular court is not based on Jewish law. Certainly not based on Jewish law. There's going to be many contradictions, things against Jewish law, let's say. But what choice do you have? It's a perversion, potentially a perversion of justice. Right, which very well could be. But if you're living in a place, right, in general, even if that's the case, what choice do you have? You don't have a choice. Someone's doing something illegally, caused you damage, whatever it is, right? Even if in secular law, it doesn't go according to Jewish law. In general, say, well, I'm stuck, and anybody can cause damage to someone else. Any Jew cause damage to someone, to another Jew, and no, they have no recourse, right? Because they won't come to Beis Din, or even sometimes they come to Beis Din. Beis Din doesn't necessarily have power to enforce. Here they do, right? In some places, Beis Din has the power to enforce. But Beis Din's power has been tremendously weakened. Tremendously weakened. Now, what about a Jew? So that's a Jew and a Jew. A Jew has an obligation to go to Beis Din first, even if they know the other Jew will not go there. Right? I'm not talking about he says, I want to go to a different Beis Din. That's a different issue. You know he's not going to go. Right? You know this. You know that. He knows that. Everybody knows that. Okay. So if all three of us, my civil complex, if all three of us know it, you're still not allowed to take him to secular court straight away. Have to get permission. Now, the question is, you have to get permission from Beis Din. Now, the problem is, as we said, well, secular court can be, for sure, a perversion of justice. Could be. Very well could be. Okay. It could go against what the Torah says. Okay. So you're going to say that's really bad. Good. All these are bad. What recourse does the person have? They don't have any other recourse. This person is not going to Beis Din. Yeah, if he's not going to Beis Din, you don't have a choice. You got to take him to secular court. Because otherwise, anyone could do, pull all kinds of shtick, and they know you can't get them. Right? Now, even if they do go to Beis Din, there are cases Beis Din, doesn't have power over. Or their power is very weakened. I know of a story. I sat in the Beis Din for 5 years. My Rabbi, so I saw all kinds of things come in. And these are all religious Jews. There weren't people coming off the street. Right? The chief rabbinate, it's like anybody, who's anybody goes to chief rabbinate. But the most religious people go to, my Rabbi's Beis Din, which is probably the most powerful base in the world. Probably according to everybody. But regardless, my Rabbi would say, it's a good thing you have a connection to me, because if you see these people who lie and cheat and this and that, big hats, long coats and all that, he said you'd have chalishas adas. It's like you'd wonder why you became religious in the first place. Right? Because you see how people can act. But you say we don't mix up Jews and Judaism. Everyone's got an evil inclination. Everyone's got a Yetzer Hara. Right? The bigger the person spiritually, the bigger the evil inclination. Okay. Right? But a case came in. I mean, it's pretty amazing thing. A guy comes in and he says, X person stole from him $250,000. Now, you're talking more than 20 years, 25 years ago. $250,000 is actually worth something, right? It's definitely worth more than it is today. Yeah, regardless. So this person comes in, and he says, we went to Borus. What does Borus mean? Borus means they chose 3 rabbis, right? Each one chose their own rabbi, right, to, fight out the case. And both of them chose the third one, right? Because you need what we call a Beis Din shackle. You need a majority, right? You need a majority. So you can't just have 2. You can't have 1 against 1, right? You need 2 against 1 to win, right? That's why you go according to the majority, right? That we learned that out, by the way, from the verse in Exodus chapter 25, verse 2. You go after the majority, right? Just as a side point, right? Remind me to come back to the story in a second, right? But just a side point, one of the rabbis came, I forget to who. Sorry, one of the Romans came to one of the rabbis. I think it's Torah Rufus who came to Rabbi Kiva. I'm not 100% sure, right? But he asked him the following question. He says, according to your Torah, it says in Exodus chapter 25, verse 2, so even the non-Jews knew the verses. It says you go after the majority. And the majority of the world is Christian. So why don't you go, I guess? Right? Your Torah says you go according to the majority. Right? So what did Rabbi Kiva answer? Or whoever it was, what does the rabbi answer? He says, yeah, you only go according to the majority when there's a doubt. Right? What's the classic case of a doubt? All right, 3 pieces of meat. 3 pieces of meat. 1, for sure, is not kosher. Right? So really, I could eat 1. I can for sure eat 1. Because we assume it came from the majority. Now the question is, can I eat the other one also? Or can I eat them together? So whatever, that's a difference of opinion. Because if you eat the whole, all of them, then you're eating, at some point you're eating treif. You're eating something non-kosher. But in either case, that's the classic case. You go after the majority. Yeah. So Rabbi Kiva said, yeah, when do we go after the majority? We only go after the majority when there's a doubt. He said, by us, the Torah is no doubt. We don't have any doubts. Right? So you're telling me we should go after the majority, and the majority of people are Christian or whatever. Very good. That's only when I have a doubt. But that's to tell you by the Torah, right? A real doubt. This isn't a doubt, right? Because we believe the Torah is true. That was the answer. Anyway, what happened in this case in Beis Din? So the guy comes in and he says, I did borers, right? Each of us chose a rabbi, and both rabbis chose the third rabbi, right? So you go according to whatever they say. You go according to the majority. Very good. And here I have the psak. Here I have the answer. And the answer is he owes me the money, right? They agreed with me. He owes me the money. So they bring it in front of the Beis Din. Beis Din looks at it. Very good. The other guy's nowhere to be found. I'm not saying he skipped town. He's nowhere to be found. He doesn't come to Beis Din. So what the Beis Din say? Beis Din said, we can't help you. Right? Then you have to take him to secular court. You have to go to secular court. Now, this is a big problem in general, especially here. Why? The issue is that if two, ultra-Orthodox Jews come into secular court, yeah, they're really supposed to go to Beis Din. Now, are there some things Beis Din maybe can't handle, has to go to secular court? Could be, right? But the vast majority of things Beis Din can handle. Yeah. There are certain things they can't judge, right? Certain things, let's say when it comes to fines and different things, they didn't have that ability to judge. Whatever, for different reasons, not the point, right now. But the idea is like this. So the Beis Din tells them, we have no choice, right? You have no choice. You have to go to secular court. Now imagine two ultra-Orthodox Jews come into secular court. It's already enough animosity between secular Jews and religious Jews in this country. Now, when it comes to judges and other things, probably like, most places, they're not so nice. Probably not so much nice. Imagine like, I don't know, you owe a company money, you owe a bank money or whatever. They're not so nice. They don't want their money, right? But they're nasty. They could be nasty, right? Now, imagine, they eat rusty nails for lunch and for breakfast, probably all together. Not the most, I wouldn't say nicest people in the world, in general. I'm not saying all of them, obviously. Go to some government offices, like, I used to renew my visas. These people, like, you'd see people, they bring like file cabinets to make sure they have every single piece of paper, right? To make sure, they get that visa, stamped. I mean, like, you have to sit there and you have to wait in long lines. I mean, now it's much, much better. It's much more organized and whatever. But, we're talking 20 years ago, so it was horrific. You had to get there, like the crack of dawn, and you had to wait in line and whatever. But you wanted to make sure you have every single paper there. Because, if you're missing one paper, too bad. Like, come back another day. Right? You have to have everything, like every last thing. So you see people like wads of paper and make sure they have every last thing. And you get up there, it's like, the people weren't, I wouldn't say the nicest people, because, in this case, obviously they want people to make aliyah. Like, why you, getting a visa? I did this for so many years, right? Because, issue with the army, whatever, living here, so, every so often I would get this question. So like one of the last times I did this, this person was, let's say, not so nice, right? We'll make it easy. And, they're basically saying, you think you can do this forever? And like, I had a bunch of kids, and like this person is like stamping all the, all the passports and, and everything, right? For this, for this visa for a year, whatever, so I knew, like, they're not going to stop because, they granted me the visa. It's very good. So as they're stamping it, I said, by the way, ein gvul, right? There's no limit. There's no limit to this. Right? I met a great rabbi once while I was doing this. And I said, by the way, I said, how long have you been doing this? He said, oh, the last 40 years. He's like, don't tell anyone. I said, okay, it's my secret. It's our secret. Yeah. So, it's like, you think you can do this forever? And I'm like, just keep stamping. Right? Come on, just keep stamping. Like I said, there's no limit. What are you going to do? Put me in jail? Because I haven't decided if I'm going to stay here forever or not? I said, there's no limit. I said, there's nothing according to the law that says there's a limit. They don't like that, but they kept stamping. They kept stamping. Okay, so not the nicest people, right? Obviously not all of them. Probably find some nice people there here and there. Okay. But you go into secular court. Yeah, when I mean secular court, I mean secular court. And they look at these two ultra-Orthodox Jews that come in as part of a dispute. Now, what's their obvious question? You see, secular law here is based on the old British law. Not that British law is anything to write home about, right? But British were here before, right? So Israelis took on British law, right? And so secular law is according to British law. A lot of it's according to British law. Okay. So two ultra-Orthodox Jews walk in. They have this dispute. They come in front of the judge, right, etc. And judge asks them, what's the dispute and what's going on and blah blah blah. But what are they thinking? What are they thinking? They're thinking you have your own courts. I mean, they're Jewish also, right? So they understand there are Jewish courts that go according to Jewish law. Very good. Right? The first question they can obviously ask is, why don't you go to Beis Din? What are you doing here? Right? And there's certain judges, certainly there are judges in New York, right, that know all about this. They know about, because Orthodox Jews are, high profile now, and, it's come through the courts many times, unfortunately. So they know them, right? And, and they know they have their courts. So imagine, right? That might be even worse, right? So here you have a non-Jew. It doesn't matter what denomination, whatever, religiously. Yeah, this non-Jew. And he sees two visibly looking Orthodox Jews walk into his court. Yeah, walk into his court. Now, if you know something about Orthodox Jews, like, hey, what are you guys doing here? Why are you in my court? Why aren't you in your own courts? It kind of looks bad. Right now, if they have a good excuse why they're there, okay. But at the end of the day, it could rub people the wrong way. You're supposed to have your own courts. Right? Now, even in New York, in some places, they will back what the rabbinical court says. Not necessarily in every place. Right? Not, etc. So what happened in this case? Right? What happened in this case? So in this case, I forgot one point, which is really, really the whole case. So, I'll give everyone advice and tell a story. Make sure to get all the points first, right? When this guy came in and said this guy stole $250,000 and he won, right? According to what the rabbi said, what did this guy do? What did this other guy do? This other guy went to secular court and got it overturned, right? Got it overturned, meaning he said they were biased against me. Whatever, he lied. Essentially, he lied about the whole thing. And he said, oh, these rabbis, blah, 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 blah. Right? Obviously spoke Lashon Hara and malign them, Moti Shemra, libel, all the good things. And he convinced them that he was in the right. And he got, usurped, whatever you want to call it. He got the raw end of the stick, so to speak, or the raw end of the deal, let's say better. He got the raw end of the deal, right? So he goes to secular court. He gives us all these lies. And what happened? They overturned it. He said, you don't know anything. So this other guy who's standing in Beis Din, he said, what am I supposed to do? He said, what in the world can I do? I have a psak din, right? I have what these three rabbis said. I'm in the right. He owes me $250,000. Yeah. Now, this schnook goes to secular court, says all these lies about these three rabbis, and he got it overturned. So now he's off the hook. According to secular law, he's off the hook. Right? According to Torah's Bible, nothing to talk about. So this guy comes in front of Beis Din and says, this is what happened. Now again, you can't make this stuff up. We always say fact is greater than fiction. So what do you do? So what do you do? Yeah. So he goes in front of the Beis Din and he asks him, so what am I supposed to do now? He said, what in the world am I supposed to do? Right? And the Beis Din said, we don't have any answers. We have no answers. This guy got it overturned. If you got it overturned, then, Beis Din is not necessarily looked at so highly, in the eyes of secular Jews. There's nothing to do. He, according to the Torah, he's liable. According to heaven, he's liable. Not going to help him here, right? He's still out $250,000. Yeah, it's a mind-boggling thing. Beis Din says we have no recourse. Because even if we would step in a secular court, or these three rabbis stand in the secular court, they wipe the face with them. They'd wipe them. Why? They said, we already posking. Get out of here. You guys usurped your power. You didn't blah, 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 whatever it was. They throw him out. This guy has no recourse. No recourse. Now, can things happen like that? Can happen. People can abuse the system, God forbid. Right? If you can't do things in Beis Din, okay, you have no choice. You have to go to secular court. But see, going to secular court also no great shakes. Right? Not just because you're going according to the law of the land. That's part of the issue. What's the bigger issue? What's the bigger issue? In secular court is corruption. Now, you got to say every single court is corrupt? No, not going to go that far. Definitely not going to go that far. Could there be people on the take that are getting bribed? Yes. Could be. Yeah, Beis Din like that also. Rabbis can also be bribed. Yeah, they can also be biased. Right? The Torah says that what's the prohibition? What's the prohibition? Torah says, tzedek tirdof, right? You have to go after righteousness. You're not allowed to lie. Who's that talking about? When going after righteousness, who's that talking about? It's talking about a rabbinic court judge. Right? Rashi, everybody says, it's talking about a rabbinic court judge, not just your average person. Right? So now, someone asks me $1 million question. The $1 million question is, what's, a rabbinic court judge, forget all the years he's supposed to learn. So, it's a lot to learn, be a rabbinic court judge. Take you, there's a program that was out, I'm sure it's still around, and others as well. Take at least 10 years. But you're going through massive amounts of material. A lot of material to go through. The laws of damages. Right, they go through laws of marriage, divorce, other things, right? But the bulk of it is all about damages. About testimony and loans and documents and all kinds of things. Right? I mean, you're talking about very heavy tractates of Talmud going through this material. It's a lot. Right? It's a lot to go through, regardless. When it says go after righteousness, you're talking about a rabbinic court judge. Now, what do you mean? You think a rabbinical court judge is going to lie? You think, the prohibition is, I just had it at the tip of my tongue, is you're not allowed to take a bribe. Sorry. You're not allowed to take a bribe. Right? When going away righteousness, that's for everybody. Right? But you're not allowed to take a bribe, the Torah says. Who's that talking about? A rabbinic court judge. Now, what about other people? It's only talking about a rabbinical court judge? What about everybody else? Yeah, right? So the commentaries say that not taking a bribe, you're talking about somebody who should be impeccable. I mean, think about it. Somebody who learns all those years should have some level of fear of heaven. Should be. Yeah. Because they learned all, not just they learned all this material. Yeah, it's more than that. Yeah, that's what they learned under. They should have integrity. Right? Right into the laws of rabbinic court judges. If they have any level of bias of one against the other, they cannot judge the case. They have to look at both people as being guilty. They can't look at both people as being guilty, they're out. They can't judge the case. If somebody did a favor, let's say one of them, they got Reuven and Shimon, and Reuven did some favor for one of the rabbinic court judges. Did one favor for them. If that rabbinic court judge has some level of bias for that person because he helped them in one thing, yeah, he can't judge the case. He has to take himself out of the case. Why? Because he's biased. Because this person helped him. So maybe he'll try and find, leniency for him or who knows what, or try and win the case for him, whatever it may be. But this is an incredible question because you're going to tell me with all that knowledge and where they're supposed to be holding on spiritual terms, why them of all people? You don't think they're going to have integrity? You think they're going to be on the take, so to speak? So they say, the greater the person in spiritual terms, we said before, the greater the evil inclination. Right? So that means there can be rabbinical courts that, are biased or can be bribed. Now, what does it take? Just we're on this subject. What does it take to make a rabbinical court? It takes 3 kosher Jews, right? Now, obviously, they have to have some level of knowledge. At least one of them has to have, some level of knowledge, so to speak. The other 2 don't have to have as much knowledge. Okay. But to set up your own rabbinical court, all you need is a stamp. All you need is a stamp, right? To stamp papers. That's all you need. Right? I once told my Rebbe, I said, for livelihood, we'll set up our rabbinical court in America. Right? We'll call it Chaim and Moshe's Beis Din, right? His name is Moshe, obviously. So he looked at me and said, okay, Moshe and Chaim's Beis Din, whatever. Right? So he says, I got a problem with that. He goes, I said, what's the problem? He goes, I'll do 80% of the work, and you get 80% of the money. I said, right, that's business. That was a good laugh, right? One of the things I got a big laugh. I said, yeah, that's business. That's the way it works. Yeah. Anybody can set up a Beis Din, right? Anybody can set up a Beis Din. All you need is a stamp, right? All you need is a stamp to do it. I mean, obviously, it should be on the up and up. You should have knowledge. Whoever is a rabbinical court judge on this Beis Din should have knowledge, and good knowledge or whatever. Okay. Yeah. Can there be Beis Dins that are known to be corrupt? Yes. I heard from a great rabbi, a podcast, whatever, a while ago, a number of years ago, let's say, we'll explain like this. Reuven and Shimon have an argument. Reuven says Shimon owes him, $1,000. Shimon says, I don't owe you nothing. Right? So Reuven says, okay, I'm going to take you to Beis Din. So Shimon says, fine. Reuven says, I'm going to go to this Beis Din. Goes, no. I want to go to a different Beis Din. Now, Shimon has the right to go to a Beis Din that he wants. Right? It's one of the laws. That's one of the laws. The Talmud, you go achar nitva. The nitva is the one who's being claimed against. Right? Shimon's being claimed against. So you go after him. So he says, I want to go after this Beis Din. I agree to go to Beis Din. I agree to go to the rabbinical court. Very good. But I'm only agreeing to go to this Beis Din. Now, what if you know this Beis Din's on the take? What if you know this Beis Din is corrupt? He has the right to go to whatever Beis Din he wants. Now, if he decides, if Reuven says, okay, I'm going to go to that Beis Din anyway, yeah, and if he loses because they're corrupt, let's say, does he have recourse to go to a different Beis Din? Right? That's the question. Or, let's say better. Let's say Shimon says, okay, I'll go to this basin. Reuben says, I'm not going to that basin. That basin's corrupt or whatever. Reuben says, I'm not going to that basin. So they have to make some sort of compromise. Yeah, what happens if there's no compromise? And Shimon goes to that basin anyway. Does Reuven have any recourse if he loses? Right? It's whatever. It's not so simple. Of course, most things not so simple, right? And B, he could actually lose. He could actually lose because of a rogue, let's say a rogue Beis Din, right? Now, this rabbi who's in the know, right? Big rabbinic scholar in America, no question. He'd be a big rabbinic scholar if he was here also. Yeah, and he said, I know of cases. He said, I know of cases where people got messed up for this reason. In other words, Reuven had Shimon owes him whatever. Shimon goes to a rogue Beis Din, Reuven loses. You're going to say, that's not fair. Right? That's totally not fair. Now, if Reuven goes to a different Beis Din, and he says, listen, I had no choice. I had to go to this Beis Din, and they were totally corrupt. Right? The question is, can they override it? Right? So the whole question here. Right? But people can get messed up. They could get messed up. Now, the $1.5 million question is, if that happens, why does Reuven over here have to lose? He got messed up from this Beis Din. Not his fault, right? Shimon pulled all kinds of shtick over here, right? Shimon's, got all the cards, so to speak. And Shimon demolishes them. Demolishes them in that Beis Din. Okay. Now, Reuven loses, right? Let's say Reuven loses. So, what happens? Right? What happens? Says like this. Now, if Reuven has no recourse, let's say he can't go directly to secular court, right? Now, it could be if he goes to another basin, so listen, this basin was corrupt, whatever, and the other basin knows that, maybe they'll give him permission to go to secular court. Okay. Let's say that's the end of it, and Reuven loses. Now, what's the bigger scheme of things here? The bigger scheme of things is that for whatever reason, Reuven's supposed to lose that money. He's supposed to lose that case. Why? It could be something his soul had to go through. His soul, I don't know, whatever it did before in a past life, now it has to get paid back. Yeah, now there's payback because it came back to this world, and now it could be there was money that soul took illegally, right, in a previous life, so now it's giving it back. Right? It can happen in messy ways. Right? So you see something like this, and you tell me, well, it doesn't make sense. There's corruption. You're right. And the person who's right shouldn't lose. Good. Right? There was a case in Beis Din once when I was there. One of the senior rabbis, Rabbi Rabinovich, blessed memory, whatever, is a Torah giant of the last generation. No question. And there was a technical issue. Shimon had done something to Reuven. Reuven didn't have all the proof, or he had part of the proof. And really, Shimon's liable, right? But based on the technicality, they can't get him. Like, for instance, let's say the Torah says, the Book of Deuteronomy, Shnei Edim Yakum Dover. You need two witnesses to establish something, right? You sign a document, you have two witnesses, right? Let's say. So in order to establish a document, I need two witnesses. Now, what if you only have one? Right? What if you only have one? So a person should never sign by themselves on a document. That's one thing you learn out. The second thing is, if, let's say, Reuven brings proof, but he only has one witness, the whole question if he should even bring the one witness. But even if he brings one witness, what's the obligation for Shimon? Right? One witness not enough to uproot it, or to establish it. So Shimon has to swear. Right? That's the halacha. In other words, you have one witness, really need two witnesses to establish it. If I have one witness, the other person has to swear. Right? Now, swearing is a very serious thing. Right? If a person swears, with a they make a vow, right? I'm not saying cursing here. They make a vow, right? But how do they make a vow over here? They make a vow with something important. They hold on to tefillin. They grab a sefer Torah, let's say, a Torah scroll, whatever. They swear. It could be it's a Torah obligation, the rabbinical obligation, different types of swearing, whatever it is, right? But they're not going to make someone swear today. Why are they going to make someone swear today? Because they're afraid they're going to lie. Right? They're afraid they're going to lie, so they won't. So the person will not be liable. Right? They will not be liable. Why? Because he's not going to swear. We're not going to make him swear. Right? We're afraid. We're afraid he's going to lie. Okay. Now that being said, this person was guilty. Beis Din agreed this person's guilty, but they only have one witness. So Rabbi Rabbi which is already an old man by then. Right, he was in his upper 80s already. He stood up and he said, we can't get you in this world. You're guilty. We all agree you're guilty. Yeah? We all agree you're guilty. We can't get you in this world. And Beis Din shel malo, in the heavenly court, they're going to get you. Right? I mean, he just thrashed him, leveled him. Yeah, I said, you think you're going to get away with it in this world? Okay, on a technicality, get away with it. But according to the Beis Din shel malo, according to the heavenly court, you're liable. You're 100% liable. Yeah? Now, could have made a compromise and could say, okay, I'll pay part of it or whatever. You won't pay any of it. Right? Whatever the case was. I don't remember what the case was. But he said you're liable in the heavenly court. Now, what does that mean? That means technically when that person dies, since they're liable, but they couldn't get him in this world, right? So maybe they're going to throw him back in another Gilgul, another reincarnated soul, maybe, right? It's probably the last time a person's going to be here anyway, but let's say. And they'll have to go through certain things and pay that back. So in certain ways, they're going to lose when they come back to this world, and they're not going to understand why. The person themselves not going to understand why. Let's say, for instance, I don't know, person got involved in some business deal. They get involved in the business deal. Yeah, and the business deal goes sour. Right? Or, heard of a case, crazy case. Two people were partners in a business, for many years. One day, one partner comes in to the business, it's gone. There's no inventory. The whole place has been cleared out. Partner nowhere to be found, fled the country. Brother been doing business for years. No inventory, no nothing. Gone though. Right? So what happened? Right? As far as I understand, that's the end of the business. Right? Seemingly. I don't remember exactly what happened, but let's say it's the end of the business. So the person was doing okay. Yeah, they had this partnership. His partnership took everything. His partner took everything. He didn't see it coming. Right? That was the case. Never saw it coming. Would never have seen it coming. Right? In general, the guy was sneaky, whatever. Snarky, whatever you want to call him. And this guy made off with everything. Now, at face value, the person could ask the question, what's happened? It's not just, wasn't bad business advice. Maybe he misread who the person was. I don't know. Right? It's something never expected. Right? Something, let's just say for argument's sake, was above nature. Totally above nature. If it's something that's totally above nature, something else going on. That means God's in control here because there's nothing you could have done. There's nothing you could have done any different that would have stopped the situation. According to nature. Now, if you're a religious Jew, you see that. Because there's nothing you could have done. So why did the person lose? In such a way. Right? Simple answer, God wanted him to lose. Why did God want him to lose? right? Obviously, it's going to be transgression, right? Either something they themselves have done, or something where their soul in the previous life did something, and now in this world, it comes back and now it's payback. That's different. Now that can happen. Now, if you say it's according to nature, and a person lost, okay. Say bad business advice, bad this, bad that, whatever. We're supposed to lose. Okay, it's the same idea. Except it was something that was never expected. Now, if it's something a person made their own mistake or other mistakes, okay. They made their own mistake, but God wanted them to lose, so they made a mistake. Or God can say, I didn't tell you to do that, but you never had anything protecting you, so, that's what happened. Or that's part of your test, or whatever. Okay. What if it's something that's against, it's an onus? There's no possible way you could have known. No possible way. Right? If there's no possible way you could have known, then obviously it's payback for something. Because you could not have known. There's no possible way, according to logic. According to nature. So it has to be something else going on. Now, we know that there are four people the Gemara says to consider like a dead person. Right? A Metzor, someone has Saras, speaking Lashon Hara, against somebody, a blind person, someone doesn't have kids, and a poor person. Now, a person could become poor and stay poor their whole lives, okay. Right? A person could lose everything, let's say, overnight. Now, why would God do that? Again, either it's payback, something they did, or something in a previous life they did, right? Or it could be, if we say, Ani choshev kameis, that a poor person is like a dead person, and what that means is they really should have died. Whatever sin they've done, or sins, let's say, God should have taken them. He should have taken their soul. But he didn't. So instead of not taking their soul, what did he do? He took their money. And Ani choshev kameis. Right now, but we're not privy to that information. Right? God's not speaking to us saying, listen, I'll give you a choice. I can take you now because you deserve it. But then it would be bad. Let's say, if you're married and your kids and all that, wouldn't be so nice. It would be very, very difficult. He said, or I can take your money. I can take all your money. And in the end, you're going to struggle for many, many years. Yeah, but you'll be alive. Yeah, take your choice. God ain't giving us that choice. Right? We're not given that choice. But that's what could happen. I'm not saying it is. 100%, there are many, many things we see that we don't understand. Well, I'll give one example. Person comes to synagogue, let's say on Shabbos. Right? He's a guest. Right? He doesn't live in this place, he's a guest. So the person giving out all the honors, people being called up to Torah and this and that, the person doesn't understand. He said, why'd you call it up him? Why'd you call it this person? Why'd you call it that person? He says, you understand, you're a guest. You don't understand what's going on. This person we called up last week, whatever, for this. This person called up this week, he had a child, a grandchild, who knows what, right? You're a guest looking in, right? It's just like you come to synagogue, you see all these honors, you have no idea why this person's getting that person or why people are not getting who knows what. You have no idea what in the world's going on. So that's just the parable for what goes on today. We don't know. We don't have any clue why things happen the way they do, right? Some things certainly for our own actions. Okay. Some things we're never going to know, right? And I'm very convinced, others can disagree, you can take this with a grain of salt, right? I'm very convinced that if a person knew why they had to go through X, Y, or Z, I don't think they'd be so ecstatic. Some people say, I'd want to know. But I think if God opened their eyes for a split second and say, wait a minute, I'm paying the price for this because something happened 6 months ago, 8 months ago, 2 weeks ago, right? You don't see the repercussions straight away because otherwise you wouldn't have free will. Okay. But if God opened our eyes, we have no idea, right? I'll give an example by Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu sees a child being used as mortar and being made into a brick. So Moshe Rabbeinu wants to save the child. Anybody who wants to save the child, who wants to see a child being made as a brick, right? So God tells him, the Medrash says it's a bad idea. Don't save the child. Moshe Rabbeinu overcome with emotion, he doesn't listen. And he goes and he saves the child. He saves the child. Who did that child grow up to be? My memory is correct, became the evil king Achav. Right? Now you got to say, look what Achav did. Look how bad he was and this and that. Did Moshe Rabbeinu have any clue who it was? No. Imagine if it was Adolf. Yeah, Yimach Shemo V'Zichro. May they be blood out, may it rot. Right? Same thing. You can kill him as a child. You gotta say, it's so cruel. Like, why would you do that? He's only a kid. Blah, blah, blah. But what if you knew the future? You're saying you're doing a great sacrifice for humanity. You're killing him. Right? Why? Because of him, there are going to be 50, 100 million people going to die. Yeah? Especially 6 million Jews. Wouldn't anyone kill him? Of course. Right? Got to say, in infanticide, whatever it's called, you're going to kill this child for nothing. Right? But you don't know. You don't know. But God knows. Right? That's the difference. Right? What we see, we don't understand, we don't fathom. Right? Now, we're going to say, this is man's inhumanity to man. Good. Right? The most bloody, century in history of man was 20th century. Right? No question. Man's absolute inhumanity to man. We see it today. See it clear as day. And you see cases where, people get gunned down. Innocent people. Children, caught in crossfire, who knows what, right? We don't make heads or tails of any of this, right? The person's going to say, what a waste of life. The person had his whole life in front of them. And what happened? What happened was killed. All right, there was a story here about a month ago in a pizza place. Kids were arguing, whatever, and someone was working at the store, and some kids ganged up on him, and they killed him. Now, I don't think they meant to kill him, but they stabbed him. Guess what? The kid died. Kid died. A horrific thing. Yeah, a horrific thing. Right? So someone had said, I found this incredulous, someone had said to be, that really, they didn't really mean to kill him. They took a knife and stabbed him. Okay. Yeah. They attacked him with a knife. Good. Or not so good. Yeah. Yeah, but you got to cut them a little bit of slack. You're not going to get them for homicide per se, because they didn't have intention to kill him. They killed him. Right? Right? I saw that and I was like, it was a religious person who said this. Right? And I'm thinking, like, what in the world are you thinking? I understand. Okay, they'll get less of a charge. Right? They'll get less of a charge because that wasn't their intention. It wasn't premeditated murder. Okay. Right? So it goes down a little bit. Right? But at the end of the day, they only stabbed him. They stabbed him without intention to kill. So that's, according to that, they didn't have intention to kill him. Right? So again, death penalty they wouldn't get. I mean, they wouldn't get, even for murder, they wouldn't necessarily get death penalty. Not everyone agrees, but, that wasn't intentional. It was intentional to injure him. Right? That's where it's coming from. Right? But it didn't sound right. Right? We don't care what his intention was. They killed him. We got him for homicide. Killed him. Cold blood. Oh, that wasn't their intention? Right? So instead of giving them life imprisonment, let's say, you give them 20 years. Maybe they'll get out good behavior after 5. But the intention now, if you look at a lot of cases, the Gemara brings up, intention is important here. Right? That's not a small thing. Right? You had intention to kill one person, you killed someone else. right? He didn't have intention to kill this person, right? Maybe you tell me he's liable anyway because he had intention to kill. Yeah, but what if he killed the wrong person? Or what if he didn't have, same thing, he didn't have intention to kill this one, he killed someone else, but he had intention to kill. That's different, right? The person had intention to kill, he's liable, right? But if he didn't have intention to kill and he kills, right? So, yeah, he's not necessarily liable for that. I mean, he's certainly liable for other things, right? But that's the case here. Now, you look at such a thing. He's a teenager. It's horrific, right? Absolutely horrific. This kid gets killed in cold blood. There are no answers. What are people going to say? It's tragic. It's for sure tragic, right? It's not even looking at the bigger picture. Because the bigger picture say, well, maybe it's all for a bigger cause, maybe for this. It's hard to say that. Because the kid is dead, 15. Right? 15, 16. Yeah, there are other things just as bad. You have, all right, that's pretty bad. You have a kid, my wife had someone she grew up with, killed in a car accident, 16. 16. It was devastating. I'm saying, so how do you look at the bigger picture? God took him then. Okay. Why? How's the time to go? Why? Can only understand at some level, very small level, right? At some level, has to do with the soul. Now, you tell me this person is over the age of bar mitzvah, okay. Right? So over the age of 13 in a day for a Jew, for a boy, 12 in a day for a girl, very good. Right? Very good. And we hold also sometimes the person's not going to get punished till the age of 20, depending on what they do. But this is a horrific thing. It's a death sentence. It's a death sentence. Yeah, things don't happen randomly. Right? That's what people have there, and this is the hard part, because they're going to say God is good, right? So if he's Zoroastrian, it's good God, bad God. Right? So evil happens by the bad God. Okay. If you're a Christian, you're going to say what? You're going to say, it's Satan's fault. Right? That's what you're going to say. Right? It's Satan's fault. Right? He's the one causing all the evil. But if you're going to say God created evil, right? If that's what we're going to say, Isaiah chapter 45, verse 7, in the right translation, God created evil. And we understand God is good, so why did it happen? Good. Good. Why did God want to happen? Good question. If I knew that, be world famous. Right? But at the end of the day, it's not random. We don't make sense of it, and it's sad. And when we see it as being sad, no one's going to see it as a good thing. Right? In general. Right? It's sad. And people go through certain things in life, it's sad. True. Right? Right? But there's no randomness, but we don't understand. Right? And it's not a cop-out either, because just like the person who came to synagogue, right? If they came to synagogue and they don't know what's going on and who's being called up and who's not and what reason, right? That's just a good parable. How in the world are we going to understand this? Because people will say, with a very puny brain, they'll say, that's man's inhumanity to man. That's true. Right? We're not going to disagree with that. That is true. But at the end of the day, there's something bigger going on. Something going on behind the scenes we're not privy to. Yeah? We're not privy to. Now, if God would open our eyes and show what this person maybe did, let's say, in a previous life, and to see all these things, and now they're going to get fixed up because they're going to go through the X, Y, and Z, it's a partial consolation. Partial. It make it a little bit easier to understand. But without that, we're lost. Right? We're totally lost. So things don't happen for for no reason. Things are not random. You're going to say, oh, if it's cop-out, you don't have an answer. We're not claiming to have an answer. We're not supposed to have an answer. We're not God. Right? And there are things we don't have answers for. Right? We don't have good answers for. But one thing we do know, God runs the world. And God's in charge. and things are not random. So why did this happen? Or why did that happen? Why did the other thing happen? I don't know. If I knew that, if I knew that, I'd be world famous. Why do people invest in the wrong things and they lose everything? Why do people, I don't know, why do people not see, a downside, in society, meaning financially? Why don't they see it? Why don't they predict it? Yeah. People saying, the stock market in America is going great, but, gas prices are up, food prices are up, other things are up. Let's say there's a recession. Certainly not a recession. Yeah, people should be doing better, you would think. Yeah, stock market's doing well. People have money in the stock market. Why not? Right? Not everything 100% is going to be predicted. And even if it is at some level, yeah, how far does that prediction go? They know, like, for the next 6 months what it's going to be, for the next 8 months. I mean, you look at certain places that, still in a recession. No one could have predicted it. Nobody. That the fallout is people dropping like flies because, it's a huge recession. Okay. Nobody could have predicted it, whatsoever. Then as things go on, you try and deal with what's going on. Okay. Right? So that's part of the test. Right? Now, if someone could have seen it and could have predicted it and could have done X, Y, or Z, maybe. Right? So why so many people have to suffer because of that? I don't know. That's the test they have to go through. Or they got an inept government that can't fix it. Or it's going to take them forever to fix it. And people are dropping like flies. That's part of the test. That 100% is part of the test. Right? You got to remember one thing. Right? And that is when things are good, right? Just like in the time of Joseph, you had 7 lean years. 7 very, very good years. But the 7 years are going to be, 7 good years are going to be followed by what? Famine. Now, he saw this because God told him. Right? So what did he do? He gathered all the food, put it in the storehouse or whatever, because it's going to be a huge famine. Yeah, so he was able to see the future. Very good. We don't see the future. People can make predictions. Yeah. People can make all kinds of predictions. They can be right, they can be wrong. Yeah. If they get it right, very good. Did anyone think to the extent, what happened during COVID? I don't think anyone had a clue. No one had a clue. Made the medical establishment look silly, right? I don't think anyone had a clue how far it was going to go. It destroyed people. Destroyed people's livelihood, everything. Yeah, some people still never recovered. Yeah, some people end up, the suicide rate was much higher, at that point, because they couldn't provide. They couldn't do anything. Maybe the first time in their life, they had all these bills, couldn't pay for it, or they couldn't work. Places couldn't stay open. Disaster. It's not predictable. Totally not predictable. Right? So some people, the irony of all that, just as a side point, I see a lot of questions here, I'll take them. Right? The irony of that is, let's say people survived. Let's say people survived. Their business survived COVID. Okay. There were some people whose business survived, but then, because of other things, their business ends up getting looted. Yeah, mobs looted. Remember that? People just came in and just took stuff. Broke in and just took everything, took all the inventory. Or it took a lot of it. So the irony is, like, for most of COVID, they survived. Somehow they survived. Yeah, but imagine then this happens. So you can ask the question, it's kind of like God's irony. You can ask the question, why for the most part of COVID they survive, but then they lose it because of these mobs. And they looted their business. What's the answer? I don't know. I think it's ironic. God kept them around, kept them alive. Somehow, maybe they didn't get the message, right? In the bigger scheme of things. They weren't thankful enough. So God said, okay, you're not thankful that everyone else dropping like flies, and I'm saving you, so I'm going to drop you in a different way. I'm going to drop you in a different way. What's a different way? I'm going to have your place totally looted. Is that expected? No. I mean, it happened. Happened a number of places. Right? It wasn't uncommon these things happen. They couldn't do anything. Right? But that's the irony. You survive one thing and then you get caught somewhere else where you didn't expect. Right? So again, I'm just setting up a scenario. I'm not saying that's the reason it happened. It could be. Right? It very well could be. Oh, you weren't thankful you survived all this time and other people you saw were, declared bankruptcy and everything else. Yeah, it's okay. So I'm going to give you a reminder. I'm going to give you didn't show enough gratitude, or you didn't show any gratitude. One of the worst, worst character traits a person can have. You're an ingrate. You don't show me gratitude. Well, guess what? I'm going to take it away a different way, a more obnoxious way. Yeah, what am I going to do? I'm going to have a whole bunch of people stand outside your place. You're not going to have anything to do. You can't save it. No way to save it. I'm not talking about burning it down. Right? That was another thing. Right? People had their, places burnt down or whatever. Okay. But I'm not even talking about that. Right? That, I think this is worse. Here, you got a whole bunch of people that just come in and steal everything. You have no recourse. Right? Now, what about insurance? Okay, maybe you get something back. But, if most of your inventory is taken, you're stuck. What are you going to do now? Maybe, they'll bail you out. The little government may bail you out a little bit, maybe. Right? Maybe, but you're toast. Everything you worked hard for, gone overnight. Right? That's a divine decree. Now, you could say, it could have done this, it could have done that, should be more careful with this, more careful. Okay, there are decisions people make that are bad. That can happen. Or why they make bad decisions? Because God makes them make a bad decision. And because God makes them make a bad decision, even though they have free will, they think, oh, this is a great thing, and they get convinced and they get left holding the bag because God wants them to lose. You can make them lose in many different ways. Right? Many different ways. I just think it's ironic that, COVID went on for so long and some people survived and then they had their business destroyed that way. Because of all the looting and rioting, whatever, right, that happened. That's mind-boggling. It's got to make you think a little bit. If a person survived that amount of time, they were able to hold out. Okay. And then they get demolished this way. It's ironic, right? Totally ironic. Yeah. All right. Let me take some questions here. Someone asked 3 classes. No, only 2. Well, actually 3. I do have a class on Hovos and Vovos for Noahites. I have this class and a class for conversion. Right, so going to be 3. 3 classes. Shouldn't the guy who lied need to have proof to back him up? I should have proof. Right? The guy who lied, keep in mind, he convinced the secular court that he was right. So whatever proof he used to convince the secular court believed him. He had whatever proof he had proof enough to convince the secular court. Whatever that proof, I don't know. I don't know what that proof was. Right? Beis Din doesn't know what that proof was. But whatever, he lied. So did he have proof of the lie? He lied, so he made it up. And they bought it. Right? The Beis Din bought it. So the secular court bought it. So the secular court bought it, doesn't matter. Right? It doesn't matter. This person now has no recourse. He can't go into secular court and say, hey, this guy lied. This guy lied and you believed him. Right? He can say, I have the thing in front of me. Right? I have the Psak Din, but they don't care about the Psak Din. They don't care what these rabbis said. They don't like these rabbis anyway. Right? So what do? So they believe what he said. They have to overrule it. So, he didn't get a fair shake. He didn't get a fair hearing. This, that, whatever it was. Right? They're not going to uproot that. Right? It's already signed, sealed, delivered. Right? Secular court, finished. No recourse. Right? No double jeopardy here. No double jeopardy. It's finished. The Beis Din said we can't do anything. We can put this guy's name out and we can, demolish his name and different things or whatever, excommunicate it, but practically speaking, you ain't getting your money back. You don't have power to do that. Right? It's already been signed, sealed, and delivered. Yeah. What did the Beis Din say? The guy, right, who won with them but lost in secular court. They said they have no recourse. They can't help him. Right? There's nothing they can do. Right? And there's nothing they can do. Right? What's the reason? Again, secular court sealed it. This guy lied. And said he wasn't treated properly, whatever the case was. Right? Secular court bought it, and that's it. What this guy's going to come in, they're not going to hear. They're not going to hear his testimony. They don't care. He said, this is what the rabbi said. This was the case, open and shut case. Blah, blah, blah. They uprooted it. They said he didn't get a fair hearing. We heard what he had to say, and that's it. Closed. What can Beis Din do for that? Beis Din has no power over here. Right? They wouldn't have any power. Because they don't hold the Beis Din anyway. They don't hold the rabbinical court in general. So they're going to say, usurp power, did other things, coercion, who knows what. Whatever the guy made up. Right? So it's his word again. What's the Beis Din going to say? We have in front of these three rabbis. They could go and testify, not going to help. It's over. Right? Nothing to do. It's sad. Right? Is it karma or evil doing? It's both. It's evil doing, but this guy was supposed to lose. Right? And this is the way he lost. In a nasty way. Yeah. But it was meant to be. Could have happened other ways. Could have happened, in different ways. Doesn't matter. This is the way it happened. Right? So he was supposed to lose, and this is the way he lost. Someone thought it was Micha the adulterer. Could be. Right? Let me double check that 1 second. Oops. One second. One second. Could be Micha. Let's see. Yeah, that is true. Not Achav was Micha. Good. Good. I've been corrected. Okay, very good. It was Micha. Okay. They was one through the name of God's right in the calf, right? Also. Somebody asked, all right, 1 second here. Let me see. Somebody asked, what does it mean to be a great person in spiritual terms? Is the great evil inclination in history's greatest monster spiritually? No. No, we're saying that if you're talking in spiritual terms, right, there are plenty of people out there that were monsters, yeah. That has nothing to do with spirituality. They're just evil in general, right? We're talking about people that have worked on themselves, have good character traits, etc. But their evil inclination is big. They have a big evil inclination, right? We're not talking about people that are, sadistic and all that and are evil in general. We're talking about people that have worked on themselves for a long time, for many, many years, right? But they have a big evil inclination. These other people, that are sadistic and murderers or whatever, they're nuts, right? It's not just a question of evil inclinations. Beyond that, right? It's definitely beyond that. What's a just aid? What is a just way to deal with a teenager who commits a severe crime when the brain is fully developed? Who can or not be reformed? Ooh, good question. Problem is, if they do something severe, And I would say they steal, right? Back in the time of the Torah, someone who stole, let's say, they would be a slave, right? They'd have to be a slave to, if they were Jewish, to a Jewish family and be rehabilitated. Or, God forbid, they could be sold to a non-Jew, right? So that's how they would get rehabilitated back in the day. Today, right? Today it's a very hard thing. Why? Because, first of all, the question is why they do it, right? And jail is going to make them worse. For sure, going to make them worse. Question is, in such a case, can they be helped in that sense? If they're on drugs, other things, they can be they go to rehab for that. Okay. If they've been abused and other things, and that's what they've been doing for the last, I don't know, however many years, it'll be very hard to fix. Put them in jail to get worse, right? Whatever, they're gonna have to pay the price according to the law, right? First of all, it depends what they've done, right? Depends what their record in crime is. Also, it will depend what will happen to them, right? But the question is, can they be rehabilitated? It depends, right? It definitely depends. Depends on a lot of different factors. Can they go to psychologists or psychiatrists? I'm not going to say they're necessarily going to help it. They can make things worse also, but is it a mental health issue? Is it just that's how they grew up? Let's say they grew up in a crime family. They grew up in a crack house. Different things. Can people be rehabilitated? They can be. I mean, you look at Nissim Black. He grew up in a crack house. He said, he's not going to be alive. How many times he saw the police came in, bust people, and this and that. It's a miracle he's alive. He said on himself. Right? So, in that sense, can people get out of situations? Yes. Is it going to be easy? No. So, it depends. Depends what they've done, and it depends what level and where they're holding. Some people, let's just say they're deranged. What do you do if they have mental health issues? So, they somewhat can be rehabilitated. Depends what they have. I don't think it's going to be easy by any stretch, but, someone just grew up in a mess, in a messed up house, and this is what they've done, and this is what they've been doing for years, in and out of delinquent, homes, and, put in different places. It's not going to be easy to fix. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but, part of the issue is that the person wants to get help. And a lot of times the person will not get help until they hit rock bottom. Right? That we mentioned many times. Any type of addiction. Yeah. Any type of addiction can do that. It doesn't, Rabbi Abraham Tversky, of blessed memory, was an expert in it, in addictions. Right? And many times he said the only way a person, whatever addiction that they have to fix, is they have to lose everything. They have to hit almost rock bottom. Pretty much rock bottom. Yeah. They have to hit rock bottom. Right? Sometimes you don't have to. At some point, a person, may get tired of this or not. Right? Sometimes, obviously if you're egged on by the wrong crowd, you got to be plucked out of the wrong crowd. Right? You have to want to fix stuff also. Not everybody wants to get fixed. They're happy, trying to steal and rob and do other things. And, it's a lot more exciting than having a boring job and trying to be a, good person in society. They want action. They want other things. Can that be fixed? It could be. It's not going to be easy to be fixed, right? But certainly it could be. And again, it depends on the crime itself also. It's going to, depend on that. It'll depend on, depend on the age, right? As well, it depends on, do they have a record, right, or not? And you have to see. I mean, a lot of factors involved. And even if you don't put them in jail, where do you put them? Where are they going to be? If they're back in the same environment, they'll come back and do it again, right? And most people who've gone to jail come out and do worse things. They get worse in jail, not better. Right? Usually. Question: should justice be more about effective reform, more about feeding our lust for retaliation? Not a question of retaliation, right? That's not necessarily the case. It's trying to rehabilitate. That's the case. The issue, yeah, you could try reform, right? The issue is, in some places, many places, certainly in the States, you can walk in the store and take out less than $1,000 worth. They can't prosecute you. I mean, that's kind of insane. If you think about it, it's a good way to go shopping. Just walk out the door. What are they going to do? They can't do anything, right? In general, and if they do, you won't sit in jail. You're not going to sit in jail, so it's worth it. I'm not saying people should do it, right? But yeah, the whole system has to be reformed, right? And you got these idiots saying we should defund the police. Well, if you defund the police, people aren't going to get help when they need it. Yeah, and then it'd be totally lawlessness, even worse than it is now, right? Yeah, how does it be changed? I don't know. Definitely should be changed, though. I mean, the whole society needs to be changed. In general, you have, jails are overcrowded, totally overcrowded. Yeah, and just people getting bad values. So, like, that's surprising. Everyone wants to make a quick buck and no one wants to work. So, like, there are businesses, quote unquote, that people may get into because more lucrative, much more lucrative. Yeah, but it comes at a price for other things. Yeah, let me see other questions here. Someone here says, one second. What if somebody in former life had to do something to survive to provide their family? Would they have to be punished in a sense in this way? Interesting question. Yeah, remember one thing: two wrongs don't make a right. The court in general, they may have mercy on somebody, but the court in general, this is why men should be judges, not women, because no offense, any women out there, but nothing to do with brain power. That's to do with emotion, right? Someone got caught stealing from somebody. Now they'll say that person has money, they're not going to miss it, blah blah blah, and they needed the money. They needed this money to feed their family. Right? Now, what would a guy say? He's a judge. Now, depending on the person's history and different things, how they're going to look at it, but guilty. Person's guilty. Now, how would a woman look at it? Now, a woman is much more emotional. Say, you don't understand what he went through. His family was starving. It's not his fault. And he grew up in a broken home and a this and a that. Not that maybe he gets off scot-free, but he doesn't get a severe punishment. For a guy, they're not going to care. Right? A different way of looking at things. Right? In general. Maybe they'll make some sort of, compromise, whatever, depending on what the kid has gone through, let's say, or what the person's gone through. Maybe. Right? But you're sitting there, a guy sitting there, he's going to say he's guilty. What do I care what the reason is? It's irrelevant what the reason is. Doesn't have a good reason. He's got no reason. Right? Even if he did something, let's say, help, his family survive, and he stole, is God going to bring him back in order to be punished? Right? Bring that soul back in order to be punished for what he did? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe allow the person to come into a dream to one of their kids or family members and say, listen, I stole money from this person, you have to pay it back. Right? You have to pay it back because I'm suffering. Instead of coming back, that's what he does. Maybe he's got that ability. God allows him to have that ability. I don't know. It depends. It depends how far it goes. Remember, stealing is the first part of judgment. Right? A person gets severely punished for stealing. right? It's no question. And what if you can't pay it back? So you pay back in increments, whatever you can pay back, right? Even though the first part of judgment is really on what you learned, did you learn Torah or were you honest in business, right? But this sort of comes to the top because you took what doesn't belong to you. Now, it could be, let's say, a person owes money. Okay. Now, you're in a situation you can't pay it back now. You try and pay it back, right? But let's say you have a lot of debts. Okay. Some things you can't pay back, right? Just for now, you can't pay it back. Now, can someone demand it? They could demand it, but, a person has a long list of debts and not making ends meet. No one's going to make them pay back. Make them pay back $10 a month, maybe. Not going to make it back a substantial amount because they don't have the money, right? I mean, whatever. It's a severe thing. No one disagrees. But what are you going to do if you can't pay it back? You got to try. You got to do something to try, right? But sometimes you just get swamped. Person gets swamped, right? People get swamped in credit card debt, let's say. Yeah, or other types of debt. Then you get percentages going up every month and you get killed. You can't even pay the minimum amount and then get them coming after you, whatever. It can happen. Just for a living. I'm not talking about living beyond your means. Right? So, I don't have an answer. Could God bring the person back? Yes. In theory, he could bring the person back and have them lose money because they stole from others, so people are going to steal from them. Could be. Or not. I don't know. Could happen. Right? It is possible. Definitely is possible. Today, though, I would say it's less possible. And the reason is because most people are not coming back after they die. This is it. Their soul is probably the last time it's going to be here. 3 times, 4 times the soul can come back. This is probably the last time. So if a person doesn't get it right now, that's it. They got to do their best. I'm not saying they can't come back. It's very unlikely, right? As much as I know, which is not much on this topic, but it would seem to me it's unlikely they'll come back, right? So you want to, try and square everything up now if possible. It's not always possible. People run into, different problems. They get stuck. It's not necessarily their fault, per se, right? What do you do? Supply and demand. People aren't buying. There's a recession. Different things going on. Not in your control, right? Not in your control. What do you do? People suffering here because the dollar's worth nothing now. Dollar's gone way down. People suffering that way. A person gets paid in dollars or whatever. And part of it, So you say you make it up in different places. It can happen, right? It can happen. Or let's say you have an, unexpected expense. Also happens. Car, health, I don't know. Or that's unexpected expense. Then what? You're already living day to day as it is. That throws everything off. Is that your fault? Not your fault per se, right? It's all part of the test, right? It's all part of the test. Not an easy test. Not an easy test to live that way, but some people live that way. That's just the way it is, right? A lot of people live day to day, paycheck to paycheck. That's how they live, right? Some better, some worse. But you have any little thing, you have no way to pay for it, what are you going to do? Yeah, what are you going to do? You need your car, let's say. Part of breaks down, and you got to cough up money, you got to fix it, otherwise you can't drive. That's a problem, right? How do you do it? Either the person borrows money, or they use a credit card, or potentially other things, right? It's not, I'm not saying it's good, or and then let's say, let's say, you married the fact you make a wedding. Okay, very good. You make a wedding. Yeah, where's that money come from? It's all miraculous in many ways. And how people survive is miraculous. That's what the Satmar Rebbe said. The greatest miracle was not the 6-day war. Greatest miracle is how ultra-Orthodox Jews in Israel marry off their kids. And when it's permissible to get married, all the halls are packed every night. How people do it? I've done it 4 times, each one its own story. Each one its own story. But what are you going to do? Not marry off your kid? Say, well, my financial situation's better. Well, it may not be better. May never be better. So what are you going to do? You got to do it anyway. How do you do it? Say God provides. God takes care of it somehow. It's miraculous. I don't have any answers. It's miraculous. Someone told me, "Wow, you have so many girls." I said, tell me how you did it. I said, each one is its own miracle. I said, that's the bottom line. Yeah, this person also has a lot of girls. So, I said I married into families that similar like mine. So like they weren't demanding, big things or whatever. And if they would, I would have said, ain't coming from me. I said, one day when I have it, good, but I don't have it. So, that's it. And some people say, okay, I'm not interested. Good. You move on. But someone told me many, many years ago he didn't have money, still doesn't have money. Right. But he said, my kids will marry into families like us. And that's the way it is. That's the way it works usually. Somehow can a person marry, a different type of family and they'll accept whatever? Yeah. Yeah. Let's say a person marries into a family and they have more money. Okay. Yeah, so they can do a lot more. Okay. Yeah, but they're not, you say, listen, this is what I can afford barely. That's what I'm going to do. And that's it. Can't do more than that. You want to do more than that? It's on you. People do that. Okay, I want to have more fancy this, that. Okay, so do it. I don't have a problem. It's just not coming from me. And I don't think people necessarily have an issue with that. Some people might, but if they have the money, what's the big deal? So do it. Right? You want to do it, but it's not coming at my expense. Bitachon, faith and trust God will provide. Yeah. You have a lot of faith. This generation, that's what the challenge is. That is what the challenge is. Challenge is God runs the world, even if we don't see it, we don't understand it, and we're in all kinds of crazy situations, but he's the one in charge. Right? That is the myth for this generation. Someone asked, no, I wore wool and linen while praying. Will it cause prayers to be invalidated? No. According to Kabbalah, the incident of Cain and Abel took place before the giving of the Torah. Yeah. Shouldn't apply. Shouldn't be a problem even according to Kabbalah. Yeah. In other words, wearing wool and linen together only applies to Jews, not non-Jews. Yeah. The non-Jew, could certainly wear wool and linen, could sell it as long as they don't sell it to Jews. Right? They can do business with it. It's not a problem. It's not forbidden for non-Jews. So it's forbidden for Jews. All right, that's the issue. Someone says, my opinion is not to reform the criminal because, no, I'd go say just about court, not a court of reform for, yeah. You got to have a no-eyed court, right? Let's say, right? 100%. 100%. And whatever it is, right? But again, there are laws. There are laws on the books. I'm just saying that even though there are laws on the books, couldn't a judge say, even though that's the law, could have mercy on the person? He could, right? There's only one problem. There's only one problem with this. The one problem is if a non-Jew steals, a penny, he's liable for death penalty, right? Unless he repents. Yeah, liable for death penalty. That doesn't change, right? That wouldn't change, right? He has to repent. If not, if a Jew saw a non-Jew stealing a penny, he could kill him, right? It doesn't need to be rebuked. Doesn't need to be warned, right? That's a death penalty, right? Stealing, any amount, he's liable, right? He would be liable. So therefore, change is not going to help, right? Certain things can't be changed, right? They won't be changed, right? Because it's liability, right? It's liability according to the no-eyed laws, right? That's true, right? That is true. Again, depending on what the person did, if the other person, let's say the other person agrees. The other person's okay, don't worry about it, whatever. And he's mobile, right? And he allows it. He says, you don't have to pay it back. What happened? The fact he was liable for death penalty? Good. That's a good question. That's a good question. What happens? Maybe you throw the whole thing out. Or maybe it doesn't help. It should help. Right? In that sense, it should help. Right? There are certain things about the law court, you can't change. That's true. Right? That's true. You have to try and rehabilitate the person. Right? That I would agree. That I would agree. But, the system is so messed up as it is. Anyway, and the way people are raised or what they get themselves into, in general, is horrific. It's absolutely horrific. Yeah, it's an easy way out. You're playing with your life in your hands. Well, it's an easy way out. right? Stealing from people, robbing, robbing people's houses, other things. It's the easier way out, unless you get caught, right? Unless you get caught, right? Then you get a problem, right? But even for non-Jews, in that case, yeah, they're severely liable here, right? Because of no-hide laws, that doesn't change, right? That doesn't change, right? That's the whole question by Shechem, why the people of Shechem were killed, right? Because really they should have turned they should have turned them in, right? They knew what happened. They should have turned them in, right? And they're liable because of the no-hide laws. So therefore, they got wiped out. That's one reason. One reason the whole community got wiped out, because they're all guilty. They're all guilty. By no-hide laws, they should have turned them in. He's a prominent person. They were afraid, this, that. It doesn't matter, right? That doesn't change, right? That's a good point. That is a good point. Someone mentions God provides our livelihood, right? Right, but it's hard. God doesn't make mistakes, but that's part of the test also. This person, there are two tests here. The person has money. Are they thankful they help other people because they have the money? Right? Or are they haughty and gaivadik and they think they're God's gift to the world? Right? They don't help people and this and that. They'll pay a severe price for that. And you have people that don't have and they struggle. Let's say they constantly struggle. Yeah, are they thankful even for the little that they have? That's also a test. It's also a big test, right? So I can tell you, I've been on both sides. They're both tests. Somebody say, yeah, I'd like, I'd like the test to well. Okay, yeah, but it comes with great responsibility, right? If you're going to help a lot of people, then people know, then people are going to be breaking down your door. So you have to be ready for that. Also, right? Like someone told me, they said, if it happens again, you know how the right way to do it. I'm like, I know the right way to do it. Run the hard way, but yeah, can't run away from it. We're going to be in the Book of Ruth. That way Melech runs away from it. There's a famine, prominent family, people breaking down his door, to help being sustained. And what did he do? He left. Shirked his responsibility, went to a desert, went to Moab, right? What happened? He died. Both of his sons marry non-Jewish women. They both die also. Like, you can't shirk responsibility, right? As hard as it was, people breaking down his door and giving him no rest and this and that, because of the famine, everything going on. He had to help them. That's his responsibility. Would he have no life and he's afraid and this and that? Sure. He's got, he's busy day and night. People breaking down his door and all that. He wants a little bit of rest. So what does he do? He leaves. What's the problem? What's the problem with leaving? He's short of responsibility. God didn't think that was so good. Yeah, so God took him for that reason. Yeah. God provides, but I very much agree that there are people with bad intention. That's also true. But remember one thing: Harbe shluchim lamakom. God has a lot of messengers, so that means that He could use somebody with bad ideas and bad things in order that you get messed up, right? But God, for whatever reason, He wants you to get messed up for that reason, right? So He's got people. He's got a lot of messengers He can use for that. Someone says, I don't think it should be illegal to steal food from the garbage bin of a grocery store. Why not? There was a great controversy about that in Portland. Why? What should be the problem? It's in the garbage. Why not? Right? Right? They're taking food that's in the garbage bin. So what? Why should that be illegal? Yeah, it shouldn't be illegal. It's in the back, if it's a garbage bin of a grocery store, they threw it out. They threw it out. I don't see what the controversy should be. Yeah. They're not going to be able to sue if they get sick. Okay, they're taking things out of the garbage. They understand that. They're taking the risk. Okay. Well, why should, if it's in the garbage, it's in the garbage. Yeah, we see people taking bottles out of garbages, right? So, they get a refund. Okay. So a lot of people do that. Yeah. Now, they're taking their own risk, right? But why should that be illegal? They throw it in the garbage. I mean, it should be legal to take. Stores throw out good food, yeah. Also. Right? You have wedding halls. there are a bunch of wedding halls, Jewish wedding halls, that they give leftover food they give to poor people. Otherwise, it's going to go straight in the garbage. Right? That's a big thing. It's a good thing. Right? Imagine if these stores gave out things that didn't look so good, but they gave to poor people. Imagine what that would do. Be a huge thing. Why does it matter if the person stealing is Jewish or not? Why is it different? Why is it different? Because there's a universal law. Yeah, there's a universal law that person's not allowed to steal. That makes sense, right? That totally makes sense, right? Jew and a non-Jew, right? They're not. So what's the difference, right? What's the difference? Let's see what the difference is. One second. Again, it's one of the Noahide laws, right? Right. Stealing in general, right? Let's think about it. Well, in terms of the the people of Sodom, if I remember correctly, the people of Sodom would steal a little bit from somebody, they wouldn't be liable. Someone else would steal a little bit from someone, same person, they wouldn't be liable till they stole everything from the person. Right? That you can't have. Why not? Because the world gets destroyed. Right? You can't live in such a world, so to speak. So theft. So the Torah Mabul, the generation of the flood, what was the final seal for them? So Rashi says the final seal was stealing. Now, why stealing? Why was stealing so bad? Weren't they guilty of the big three? You have to give up your life for any time, any place, right? Shvichus Damim, and Avodah Zarah, right? Idolatry, immorality, and murder. Weren't all those things going on at the time of the generation of the flood? Yes. But the generation of the flood, their fate was not sealed by that. It did exist. There's no question it existed. But at the end of the day, why was their fate sealed? Because of stealing. Because you can't live in a world where people steal and get away with it. Because if they are going to get away with it, it'll be destruction. What happened in Sodom also. Right? It'll bring about utter destruction. Society will not survive. Right? So how can a retail store, for whatever they have in general, how can they survive a person allowed legally to steal up to $1,000 in some place? They have no recourse. And if a whole bunch of people do that over time, they lose money. Right? So, where's the incentive to open such a business? It's a problem. Right? It's definitely an issue. I don't think there's any question. So, by definition, what does that do? It breaks down. It breaks down society. Right? Now, the severity of stealing in general is extremely severe. Everyone agrees. Right? Everyone agrees, according to the Noahide laws, that stealing is forbidden, robbery, right? Kidnapping, that's why you need secular law courts. Yeah. Now, why is it so severe? So we understand, right? We understand the severity of stealing, right? In general, right? That we understand. Now, why? What's the difference? What's the difference between a Jew and a non-Jew? That a non-Jew, only the law of a pruta, right, which is a minimal amount. So for non-Jews, again, what's the difference over here? What's the difference over here in the way we look at non-Jews and Jews in general, right? And why we have these laws. So Noahide prohibition is what? If you allow theft at any level, you're going to destroy society, right? In other words, you will not have an orderly society. There'll be lawlessness, right? So you say, oh, come on, it's no big deal. It's only petty theft, so to speak. Or they'll say it's too cheap to matter. No one's going to care anyway. That will bring about lawlessness, right? How does the Torah look at Jews? What's the Torah law of theft? We're talking about returning the object or paying a double penalty, right? You have to pay double for when a person steals. But the minimal level, again, is a proof, is a definition. That's the definition of money, let's say, or property. So, but why won't a rabbinical court or a Beis Din even discuss this? Because if it's a minimal amount, the victim normally is going to be presumed to give up ownership. Right? He's going to be mochel. He's going to give up ownership. He's not going to care. Right? Due to the insignificance, right, of it. So therefore, what's going to happen? The difference between the minimal amount for a Jew and a non-Jew, for a non-Jew means in their society won't survive. You have to show the severity, right? You have to show the severity of what it is. Yeah? That's what you have to do. Otherwise, right? Otherwise, you will not preserve an orderly society, meaning petty theft is okay, right? So for Jews, petty theft, we're not going to say it's okay per se, right? It's still not a good thing. But what's the difference? The difference is the other person is not going to care. Okay, it's a minimum amount. So the person stole a minimum amount. Okay. Yeah. Stole a minimal amount. So they're going to look the other way. It's not good what the person did, but he's not going to be liable. In this case, for a non-Jew, it would be destructive in society. Totally destructive. Someone said he had a break-in, came home, the house was ransacked. That's traumatic. That for sure is traumatic because then the person feels they've been violated. Yeah, it's horrific. Definitely horrific. That's no question. But again, things have value. You can't play with these things either. And the reason is because, you'll destroy society in the process. That's what will happen. Somebody asked, what about begging? There are people that do that. People that don't want to work, let's say, and they do actually pretty good. They don't look at it as being being degrading or whatever. That's what they do. Now, I'm not saying because of injury, other things, they need help, whatever. Right? Here they do it. Right? My Rabbi always says, there's an obligation to give matanos levyonim, right? To give gifts to the poor and poor. So someone asked them, what about these people collect all the time? I said, don't worry, they're probably doing better than you. They're not paying taxes, right? Let's say, because they probably don't declare it, whatever. But to find someone, who doesn't have food for the meal, like, you're gonna find someone who's really in need. But he said some of these people are not in need. Why aren't they in need? Because they got plenty. they're doing very well. They're not paying taxes, right? Let's say, they go from synagogue to synagogue, place to place. They get money here, money there. They can make good money. So it's better than working. Again, it is degrading. It is degrading in different ways, but some people don't seem to care. And that's what they do. They'll take the embarrassment, but they're being taken care of. They're definitely being taken care of. So like my Rebbe would say, like, how many people, you're gonna find it like, really destitute. But there's another thing someone brought down, which is actually kind of funny, in a certain way. They brought down that that someone who is fitting to get money on Purim is someone who doesn't make it to the end of the month. In other words, they're somehow in the red at the end of the month. So Rebbe laughed. He goes, all right, who's not in the red at the end of the month? There are people, okay, doing very well. They're not in the red, okay, right? But a lot of people are in the red at the end of the month. Here, say people in overdraft, if you have a certain amount of overdraft, let's say, and the bank covers it. So they said, I don't know, it was a few years ago, they said, people owe banks like tens of millions of shekels. The bank gives them overdraft. Whatever, some more, some less, whatever it is. But that's how people live. I'm not saying it's good. A friend of mine told me recently, somewhat recently, that as the bank manager, he goes, you make it through the end of the month? He didn't get an answer. He smiled. Bank manager should make halfway decent money. Yeah, should, right? In theory. Right? I'm not looking into anyone's private account or what they're doing, but he didn't answer him. So yeah, people make less money here, true. Right? People struggle, true. Everyone, more or less in the same boat. Some have more, some have less, whatever. But, some people don't think this is horrible. They're like, you should just be able to make ends meet, and, you get a paycheck and it should go and everything, and, play the guitar and sing Kumbaya, but it doesn't work that way. Right? Most people, as we said before, are living, paycheck to paycheck. That's the way it works. Yeah. And so some people just totally horrified by it. Like, I made money. We made money. Like, what's the problem? Oh, you're in the wrong field. You should be doing this, doing that. Everyone's got an answer, right? Everyone's a Monday morning quarterback. Yeah. So certain things offset. Okay, here health insurance doesn't cost so much. Schooling for kids, for the most part, doesn't cost so much. So that's two major things, that the state has that's, up to gazoo with the tuition and, and health insurance, let's say. Right? A lot of people here don't have cars. Some people do. A lot of people don't. Yeah, it's a big expense. Okay, so like certain things, may offset. What do you call it? Rent is pretty high here. Like in other places, food is expensive. Whatever. So like, certain things do offset, but you're making less money also, right? In general, but there's people. People have emunah. People, do the best they can, and like whatever. Sometimes you get stuck, and other things happen, and but at the end of the day, the question is, how am I looking at everything? That's the question. I would say, like, if you're alive, you're still smiling a little bit, and regardless of what's going on, you're doing good. Okay, you don't want to put yourself in bad situations and all that. Sometimes you don't have a choice, right? Sometimes we get ourselves in bad situations. Sometimes we do it to ourselves. Sometimes, sometimes under onus, right? Sometimes it's onus. Sometimes it's beyond your control. And if it's beyond your control, that means God's running the show. That means there's something else going on. We don't know, right? We don't know. No one should have to be a beggar. No one should have to go to other people and, whatever on a regular basis. It shouldn't happen. But listen, sometimes people get stuck, right? Some people, some people get stuck and all that. That's what happens. It's not necessarily their fault. Could be, right? It certainly could be. Someone here says, watch an interview with a chess master. Okay. In every major city in the world, again, people living on the street struggling with mental illness. Who could beat them at chess? Okay. Listen, mental illness is a problem. It's not a small problem. It's a big problem. Yeah, but I'm not even talking about people with mental illness, right? Again, the issue could be a person could be very smart, could have a degree, quote unquote. We're not going to talk about degrees and trash that, but a person can have a degree and this and that and still rub against me. People say, but it's your fault. You should do this, you should do that. Like, what do? You work for a company, went under. Yeah, I had this twice. Twice. Yeah. A company been around for, I don't know, 10 years more, then expanded too fast and fell flat in their face, and someone else been around for more than that, more 20 years, 25 years. Real estate company, something happened, and they let everyone go here, just about. Yeah. There's still like skeleton crew in the States somewhere. Yeah, so, they say it's your luck. It's your good luck, I guess. Right? There's no guarantee. Person will work for a company 20 years. There's a company can go under. Things can happen. You say that shouldn't happen. Yeah. Want to speak to Sears Roebuck? They went under. Toys R Us, they went under. Well, the company's been around for a long time. Yeah, they went under. Yeah. So you tell me, what malls are having trouble getting people in because people buying things online and competing with that and other. Yeah, things have changed. Things have changed. Yeah. So, a person got in through a certain place or whatever, things can happen. Now, it's not a guarantee, it's a test. That's the whole point. It's a test, right? Here you think you get some stability, and boom, something happens. Something happens, right? So, I got laid off, and a lot of people got laid off working for this real estate company a number of years ago, right? But I didn't even get, what do you call it? I didn't even get unemployment. I wasn't there long enough. I was there less than a year. Only get unemployment, you have to be there for a year. Could be that's why they fired me before, whatever. Let go a number of people before. It could be whatever. It doesn't matter. The whole company went under, basically, right? So it's God's irony. So now what? Now what? I think I probably gave up 2 years of my life doing this, just because of the hours and different things. So I said, all right, God, what do you want now? What do you want now? Right? And then an absolute miracle happened. Right? I started giving more classes, different things. I got a lot more students, and then that took over for what I was making. So why do I have to go that route for, I don't know, for 11 months? Show mysterious nefesh, self-sacrifice? I don't know. I don't have any ideas, but I wasn't doing anything radically different. Nothing radically different. Okay, gave a few, went back to giving different classes, different things. Okay. Start up my Q&As, other things. But that's not a reason things should have turned over in such a short amount of time. I don't have an answer for that. Right? So yeah, it's all these things are a test. No guarantee. Right? The only guarantee in life is what I always say, death and taxes. Right? Not in that order. So that's the guarantee. Someone says USA considers someone to be mentally ill. Okay. Yeah, probably think I'm mentally ill also. So maybe I could collect from that. I'll look into it. Say I'm out of say I'm out of my mind, get disability. Maybe. Maybe. It's good. Maybe it's a good idea. Maybe bring the floodgates coming in. Who knows? Who knows? Yeah. Any other questions? Um, it's not stealing. Not necessarily stealing. If they fire you between, for a year because they don't, before a year because they don't want to, you don't have to get unemployment. I don't know. It wasn't. I would say probably not such a nice thing to do, but is that considered? It's not necessarily considered stealing per se. Yeah, it's a business decision. You can say, well, every business decision that's could be stealing. It's not. I don't think in this case. I don't think it was the greatest thing to do, but you know, my mother said no. So she said, okay, you want to do what you want to do, so you got to run it like a business. So started doing a lot more, posted more, did more videos, other things, but that shouldn't have been a guarantee for anything. There's never been a guarantee for anything, right? Sometimes better, sometimes not, whatever it is, doesn't matter, right? But the point is, I kept my ears and eyes open for other things just to see, right? And then things exploded out of, I don't have a reason why, right? I didn't do anything radically different than I was normally doing before, right? So, the only thing I can think of, and I can be totally wrong, anyone's guess is as good as mine, right? The fact that if, what do you call it? If God saw self-sacrifice, a tremendous amount of self-sacrifice, so he paid me back. He paid me back in a short amount of time. Yeah. He paid me back in a short amount of time. Why? Don't know. I'm saying that could be the reason. I'm saying it's the only reason. Right? Again, just because I said it's not, it's business doesn't mean, I'm not saying it's totally right. Right? But I don't think it's still in either case. Someone asks, does Israel participate in the social security system? Yeah, you pay into it. Yeah, you definitely pay into it. You don't get the money back. You get money back for putting money into what do you call it? Into a pension, right? You're supposed to really take money if you're working for a company, they take money aside, put it into a pension. Whatever pension you want, they put it in. If you work independently, you have to put money in your pension also, right? I mean, you should every month, right? So American moves to Israel still qualify for theirs. Yeah, if you worked in America, you would still get Social Security, right? So, I mean, I should have it coming also. I don't know how much, but whatever. 20 years when I had money stolen, I didn't have to pay Social Security, so that was good. I mean, that was the only thing, sorry, I had to pay. I didn't have to pay anything else because of the doctored documents or whatever. So everything else, all tax I didn't have to pay up until the last number of years, but I only had to pay Social Security. So Social Security I have. So I don't know how much it's going to be in the end, if it's still going to be there, but whatever. Worry about it. Worry about it. So here, Social Security is used for other things, right? But you're not taking it back with you. You're definitely not taking it back with you. You put money into a pension that you get at the end, and hopefully there's something there. Yeah. What if it's for disability? You still get it. Why not? The person that, right? I know people that are on Social Security that they get the money sent here. They're on disability. Could they get the money sent here? Why not? I don't see why not. I don't know for sure, but I don't see why that should be a problem. I don't see why that should be a problem. They could. The question is, can you live off disability? Right? If you live off disability there, then you can certainly live it off here. Right? So, you just have to pay rent or whatever. So if it's not to pay rent, and most of your living expenses, or at least, part of the living expenses. So yeah, a person can do that. Right. But it would have to be sent either you could have it sent in the States if you have an account, if you have a bank account there, it could be sent there. You could just draw off the bank account, or you could have it sent here. I know somebody that has it sent here. He gets it put in his bank account every month. And he can work it out. Right. America has great agreements with Israel, because if you're an American citizen, I'll just point this out. If you're an American citizen, you have to tell the bank you're an American citizen. So if you're an American citizen, if you get more than, if someone sends if you put in, let's say, more than $10,000, into your account, they're going to flag it, right? Because you're not allowed to have that much in your account, and then they're going to contact the IRS, and you're gonna have all kinds of issues. So people if they want to buy an apartment or other things that are worth a lot of money, how do you do it without putting the money in your account? So that's a big question, right? People do it through money changers, other things, right? There are some ways around it, not 100% good ways, but there are ways around it. Someone asks whether they become an Israeli citizen. Same thing. If they become an Israeli citizen, they could have it sent to Israel. There's no reason why not, right? No reason why not, right? So you have to set up a bank account, right? Yeah, they would transfer it there. I'm saying if someone had a bank account in the States and wanted to live there, they could have it transferred there and just draw from it. But yeah, they could have it sent here. 100%. You could have dual citizenship, you could have it sent. Yeah, somebody asks, can I explain how a Gentile can offer a burnt offering? You can't. There are no burnt offerings today. There are no offerings today. Nobody offers it. Right? Not even on private altars. They don't do private altars anymore. Right? So therefore it can't be done. No sacrifice, a Jew or non-Jew can do that. Someone there says some people with disability might be able to afford living overseas better. It depends where. Israel's a very expensive place to live. Depends where, right? Those American towns in Panama, they're okay, right? If the dollar goes further in other places, good. Doesn't dollar ain't worth spit over here right now. I'll tell you that, it's the lowest it's ever been. So, people are gonna have a hard time. They have to go to places where the affordability is better. Yeah, but all things being equal, if the dollar would be worth a lot more, it would go further. It would go further. It's possible, right? But it's probably better to be in other places where cost of living is not as high. But then people say cost of living is high everywhere. Okay, yeah, that might be true, right? That may be, that may be true. So it depends. That would depend. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Don't sacrifices. Don't worry about sacrifices. Sacrifices come when the temple comes. That's it. Ain't gonna be any sacrifices till then. Not private, not public, right? Jew, non-Jew, doesn't matter. Never gonna be done. Never gonna be done until Messiah comes. Yeah. Any other questions? Retired buy a yacht, live anywhere in the world. Great. You can do it. I have a cousin who's young, whatever, has got a house somewhere rented out, he's living on a boat. What he's doing right now is making enough money, I guess, to live in a boat. Problem was his boat got trashed. Middle of the night, someone crashed his boat at like 2 a.m. You imagine his boat was like anchored or whatever. Someone just came plowing into it like 2 a.m. Destroy, I mean, whatever. He didn't get hurt, and his dog, I guess, didn't get hurt, but his boat got, totally demolished. So I think it took a few months insurance to kick in and get another boat, and now he's sailing around. But okay, yeah, it's the pina coladas, why not? It's a great idea if I can do it, right? But wouldn't last that long doing it, be bored. Yeah, I gotta give me a Gemara, I gotta give me a Chum or something, otherwise not so exciting. All right, any questions? Good. I'm gonna stop here. I do this every Sunday, 9 o'clock Eastern time, 4 o'clock Israel time.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, anyone has any questions? You can find me on Facebook at Michael Coffman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism. I think my website should be up, hopefully. My blog should be back up and running. Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos, Q&As, Ethics for Fathers, Book of Leviticus, making all these shorts also. Going to be one for Shavuos coming up shortly, next couple of days. Otherwise, you can send me an email, rabbichaimcoffman@gmail.com, RBBICHAIMCOFFMAN@gmail.com, whichever good. Beginning of the day, middle of the day, end of the day, and everyone has